Today we're diving into a story that spans over 4,000 years. It's a story about a forgotten empire, a deliberate collapse, and a modern-day comeback, all centered on one of the most important waterways in the world. So let's kick things off with a question that seems almost too simple. Why is the Indian Ocean named after India? I mean, think about it. It's the only one of the world's great oceans named for just one nation. Was it just a random decision by a mapmaker, a quirk of the colonial era?
Well, it turns out that for most of human history, the answer to that question was kinda obvious. For thousands of years, the evidence shows that Indian ships didn't just sail this ocean, they pretty much owned it.
To really get this, we've got to go back. I mean, way back. We're starting in an era when India wasn't just another player in sea trade, they were basically writing the rule book.
So check this out. Our first stop is what you see here, the world's earliest known dock, found at a place called Lothal in modern-day Gujarat. It was discovered back in 1954, and this thing dates all the way back to around 2400 BC. This isn't just some old place to park a boat. It's a testament to some seriously incredible ancient ingenuity.
And what's just mind-blowing is how advanced this dock was. I mean, the Harappan engineers who designed it had this deep, sophisticated understanding of tides and water flow. They used kiln-fired bricks so the walls would last. They built sluice gates to control the water levels. They even cleverly positioned the whole thing away from the main river currents so it wouldn't fill up with silt. This was absolutely world-class engineering over 4,000 years ago.
And this is where it gets really wild. The basic technology behind the Lothal dock is shockingly similar to the Bombay Princess dock, which the British built, get this, over 4,400 years later in the exact same region. That's how far ahead of their time these ancient engineers were.
Okay, so you've got these incredible docks. But what about the ships themselves? Well, they were something else. They were built from this legendary Kerala teak, and their planks were stitched together with coconut fiber yarn, which made them super flexible and ridiculously durable. We have accounts from travelers like Marco Polo describing ships that could carry over 700 people and were built to last a whole century. You know, when the famous Chinese Admiral Cheng Ho showed up in the 14th century, his massive fleet was supposedly dwarfed by the Indian ships he saw.
And look, this wasn't some small-time local trade. We're talking about serious economic muscle. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder was complaining all the way back in 70 AD that India was draining the Roman Empire of 100 million sesterces every single year. That's the kind of global trade that builds empires. And yeah, that's how you get an ocean named after you.
So you have this powerhouse, this absolute giant of maritime trade for thousands of years. So what went wrong? How did it all just vanish? Well, the answer isn't a story of just slowly fading away. It was a calculated, deliberate takedown. By the 1700s and 1800s, Indian-built ships still made from that amazing teak were just plain better than their British counterparts. There's one ship, the Darya Daulat, that was recorded as being in service for 87 years. This kind of quality and longevity really started to worry the big players back in Britain, who saw Indian industry as a direct threat to their own wallets.
And Mahatma Gandhi, well, he put it about as bluntly as you can. The fall of Indian shipping wasn't some historical accident. It wasn't a failure to keep up with the times. No, it had to be destroyed so that British shipping could take its place.
And just look at how fast it happened. It's staggering. In 1857, there were over 34,000 Indian-owned ships operating. Just 43 years later, by 1900, that number had crashed by 95% to less than 1,700. It was a complete collapse.
So how did they pull this off? Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was a deliberate, step-by-step strangulation of an entire industry. First, they used protectionist laws, like the Navigation Act, to squeeze Indian ships out of the most profitable routes. Then, they slapped on punitive taxes. You'd have to pay double the import duties if your goods were on an Indian-built ship. After that came outright bans on even building certain kinds of boats. And finally, to make sure it all stuck, any local carpenter or blacksmith caught building or even repairing these boats could be thrown in prison or even whipped.
And this infamous quote from Lord Macaulay from 1835, it just lays the whole mindset bare. It wasn't just about money or ships. The goal was to break the country's confidence, its spirit, its cultural heritage. It was about convincing people that, as he said, all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own. Wiping out a 4,000-year-old maritime tradition was a huge part of that plan. But, of course, that's not the end of the story. Not by a long shot. After all that suppression and decline, the 20th century marked the beginning of a long, really tough journey back, a story of recovery and ultimately vindication.
And this timeline, wow, it really tells you everything you need to know about that comeback. In 1919, you have the SS Loyalty sailing to the UK, a huge symbolic moment for modern Indian shipping. Just a few years later, in 1927, you have a British official stating that Indians could never be good captains. Okay, well, fast forward to 2006, you have Indian captains commanding the largest supertankers and vessels on the entire planet. Now that is a pretty powerful clapback to that old colonial prejudice.
And if you want to talk numbers, just get a load of this. The economic comeback has been absolutely mind-blowing. From that low point in 1900, the amount of cargo handled by India's major ports grew by more than 3,000 times by 2003. That's just a monumental recovery.
But, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The journey isn't over, and that brings us to the big challenge today. Even with India's massive, booming economy, a staggering 86% of the country's own overseas trade is carried by foreign ships. It's this lingering ghost of that colonial-era collapse. And this economic challenge, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's now tied up in a whole new geopolitical game, as the Indian Ocean becomes once again a central stage for global power struggles.
So there's this term that gets thrown around a lot in foreign policy circles these days: net provider of security. Basically, it means a country that has the muscle and the will to not just protect itself, but to help keep its whole neighborhood stable and secure. And that's exactly the role that major world powers, like the US, now see India playing in the Indian Ocean.
And this is where things get really interesting today. You've got this fascinating dynamic playing out. On one side, you have China dramatically increasing its naval presence, getting access to strategic ports like Gwadar and Pakistan. And on the other side, you have India strengthening its partnerships, especially with the United States, through things like joint naval drills and big diplomatic efforts.
What all this means is that we're seeing a huge shift in India's strategic thinking. For decades after independence, the main focus was on land, and it was centered on Pakistan. Today, the primary challenge is becoming maritime, and it's all about China's growing ambitions in the Indian Ocean. And that, right there, brings us full circle, all the way back to our very first question. After this incredible 4,000-year history of dominance, a devastating and calculated collapse, and a century-long fight to recover, India is at a new crossroads. As the entire world's center of gravity shifts east, the final question is the biggest one of all. In the 21st century, will the Indian Ocean once again truly live up to its name?